They didn't wait until morning. That's the part that told you everything you needed to know about how the Dodgers felt after that loss. Organizations that are merely disappointed wait until morning. They sleep on it. They let the emotions settle. They come back to the front office with fresh eyes and measured thinking and the kind of careful language that front offices prefer when they are making decisions that affect people's livelihoods. The Dodgers did not wait until morning. The calls were made that night. The decisions had already been reached before the clubhouse finished clearing out. And by the time most of the baseball world was waking up and reaching for their phones, two players who had gone to sleep as members of the Los Angeles Dodgers woke up as something else entirely. It wasn't a rebuilding move. It wasn't a salary maneuver dressed up in roster language. It was a purge. And the people inside that organization knew exactly what it was. The loss itself had been the kind that stays with a team. Not because of the score. Scores are forgotten faster than people think. But because of how it happened. Because of the specific moments inside it that told a story the Dodgers did not want told about themselves in the middle of a pennant race that had no margin for the kind of performance they had just produced. Dave Roberts had sat in the dugout in the final inning and watched things unfold the way a manager watches things when he has already begun separating what he is seeing from what he had believed was true before the game started. The quiet recalibration that happens behind the eyes of someone who makes decisions for a living. He didn't say anything dramatic in the dugout. He didn't need to. The front office had already started making calls from upstairs. By morning, the announcements were official. 2 players. Designated for assignment simultaneously. Not one after the other in the careful, staggered way that organizations sometimes use to soften the optics of a difficult decision. Both at once. The kind of simultaneous action that communicates something beyond roster management. That communicates urgency. That communicates a standard being enforced in real time rather than debated in meetings. The baseball world stopped for a moment when the notifications came through. Not because either player was a household name in the way that Ohtani is a household name or Freddie Freeman is a household name. But because of what the timing said. Because of what the simultaneity said. Because of what it meant that the Dodgers, a franchise that carries itself with a particular kind of deliberateness, that does not typically make emotional decisions in the hours immediately following a painful loss, had moved this fast. It meant the decision had not been made that night. It meant the decision had been waiting. Ready. Held in place by a performance threshold that those 2 players had finally, definitively failed to clear. The Ben Rortvedt signing landed in the middle of all of it like a stone dropped into still water. 5 years. The number sat there in the transaction wire and demanded to be looked at directly. Not the kind of contract you offer a stopgap. Not the kind of contract you offer a placeholder while you wait for someone better to become available. 5 years is a statement. 5 years is a commitment that extends beyond this season and next season and the season after that. 5 years is an organization saying out loud, with money and with time, that it believes in what it is acquiring. Rortvedt had been available. The industry had known that for weeks. There had been conversations, quiet ones, the kind that happen in the background of a roster construction process while the public-facing part of the roster continues to play games and produce results or fail to produce them. Now those conversations had produced a conclusion. And the conclusion arrived at the exact moment that 2 other conversations, the ones about the players who had just been designated, had been brought to their own conclusion. That was not a coincidence. That was a front office executing a plan that had been assembled piece by piece and was now being implemented all at once. Roberts spoke the next day. He did not come to the podium looking like a man who was uncomfortable with what had happened. He came looking like a man who had made peace with a difficult reality and was prepared to describe that reality in plain terms. Which is, in its own way, a more unsettling thing to witness than discomfort would have been. A reporter asked him directly about the designated assignments. About what those 2 players had represented to the roster and why the decision had come when it did. Roberts nodded. He had been expecting the question. He always expects the questions. That is part of what makes him effective at the podium and occasionally startling. He said the organization had been patient. He said it had given every opportunity for the situation to develop differently than it had developed. He said that at a certain point, patience becomes something else. It becomes avoidance. And the Dodgers could not afford avoidance in the position they were in. Then he said the thing that made the room go quiet. He said, even if they're stars, if they're no longer useful to what we're trying to do, we have to make the move. A reporter asked him to clarify what he meant by stars. Roberts looked at her calmly. He said he meant players who had been counted on. Players who had carried expectations into the season that had not been met by the calendar point they had now reached. He said the word stars the way a person says a word when they want it to carry more weight than its dictionary definition. The room understood. Inside the clubhouse, the response was the kind that clubhouses produce when something significant has just happened and everyone is trying to calibrate how much of what they actually feel they are permitted to express. Veterans said the right things. They talked about the organization's commitment to winning. They talked about respecting the process. They talked about using the moment as motivation rather than as disruption. But the conversations in quieter corners of that clubhouse, the ones that happened away from recorders and notebooks, carried a different texture. Because when an organization moves that fast, when the decisions come that hard and that simultaneously, it does something to the people who remain. It reminds them that remaining is not a permanent condition. That the threshold exists for everyone. That the grace period, whatever its length, always has an end. That is not a comfortable reminder. But it is, for a team with championship ambitions in the second half of a season that is already producing pressure, a necessary one. Rortvedt arrived in Los Angeles with the quiet confidence of a player who knows why he was called. Not the loud confidence of someone who needs to announce his value. The quiet kind. The kind that comes from understanding exactly what a situation requires and believing, without needing to perform the belief, that he is equipped to provide it. His first conversation with Roberts, according to people familiar with the exchange, was short. Roberts did not spend a long time explaining the situation to him. Rortvedt had watched enough baseball to understand the situation without a lengthy briefing. He knew what had happened before he arrived. He knew what was expected. He had signed a 5-year contract with a team that had just made 2 simultaneous roster decisions in the immediate aftermath of a difficult loss. The expectations did not require elaboration. He nodded. He unpacked. He got to work. And then there was the matter of rushing. The name had been circulating in baseball conversations for weeks in the particular way that young players circulate when the people watching closely believe something is coming but the organization has not yet confirmed it. The whispers that happen in press boxes and on beat writer group chats and in the margins of scouting conversations when someone is about to cross a threshold that changes their career permanently. Rushing had been performing. The numbers existed and they were not subtle numbers. They were the kind of numbers that create urgency in front offices, that make the conversations about timing less theoretical and more immediate. The question had stopped being whether and had become when. After the designations. After the Rortvedt signing. After Roberts' words at the podium landed and spread and were replayed and analyzed. The when was getting very close to now. What the Dodgers were doing, assembled together and viewed from a distance, was not unusual for a franchise operating at their level of intentionality. Roster construction at that level is never static. It is never the product of hoping that the players you have will become what you need them to be. It is the product of constant evaluation and constant willingness to act on what the evaluation reveals, regardless of what it costs emotionally or financially or in terms of the relationships that develop over a season between players and coaches and organizations. The Dodgers have built something that allows them to make those decisions without flinching. That is the part that other franchises study. Not the star acquisitions. Not the payroll flexibility. The willingness to act on what they know even when acting is hard. Even when the players involved are ones who were counted on. Even when the timing is uncomfortable. Even when it happens at night, before the emotions have settled, before the baseball world has had time to process the loss that preceded the decision. They didn't wait until morning. And that sentence, simple as it is, contains most of what you need to understand about why this organization remains where it remains in October conversations year after year. Roberts was asked one more question before he left the podium that day. A reporter, one of the younger ones sitting near the back of the room, asked him whether he thought the move sent a message to the rest of the roster. Roberts looked at him for a moment. He said he didn't think of it as a message. He said messages were for situations where you needed people to understand something they didn't already understand. He said the people in that clubhouse already understood. They had understood before the designations were announced. They had understood before he stood at the podium. They had understood from the moment the loss ended and the night continued without the phone calls stopping. He said the moves weren't a message. They were a standard. He stood up. He straightened his jacket. He walked out of the room the way he had walked in, like a man who had made peace with a difficult reality and was prepared to keep moving toward what came next. Behind him, the room sat with that word for a moment. Standard. Not a threat. Not a warning. Not a message sent in the heat of a difficult night. A standard. Applied evenly. Applied without exception. Even to stars. Especially to stars.